Well, good morning again, everybody. It is such an honor to be here with you as we continue our series, The Greatest Storyteller. Everybody look at your neighbor and say, The Greatest Storyteller. Okay, and in week 1, we talked about how Jesus taught predominantly through stories, right? That he used stories to illustrate things so that we could understand them. We made this definition of these stories, which are called parables. Okay, everybody look at your second favorite neighbor and say parables. Okay, parables are this, and the definition will be on the screen. Parables are an earthly illustration of a spiritual principle, or an earthly story with a spiritual meaning. Okay, so Jesus taught using these parables not to confuse us, but so that he could use illustrations, use examples that we could understand. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm thankful that Jesus made some things easy for me, okay? Because some things can get kind of confusing. But he used these parables really so that we would understand what the kingdom of God is like, what God is like, what Jesus is like, and what we're supposed to do as followers of him. And those stories were called parables. And like I said, last week we had missionary Stephen Sullivan here with us. And wasn't it just such a blessing to have him here last week as he spoke? I was so pleased with the word that he brought. And I want to let you know that I didn't give him any direction. I said, Pastor Stephen, you preach on whatever God lays on your heart. And he came last week and spoke on the parable of the talents. How many of you know that God is a better planner than we are? Amen. He is. And I'm so thankful for that because honestly, I'm sometimes a terrible planner. But he spoke on that, and it was such a blessing to us. But it went right along with our series. So this morning, we're in week 3 of our series, The Greatest Storyteller, and we're going to be in Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. So if you have a Bible with you, you can open there, or you can scroll there, click there, or the scriptures will be on the screen. And the title of my message this morning is Follow Through. Everybody look at your first favorite neighbor and say, Follow Through. Because, see, we all know the phrase follow through, right? We've all heard of that before. Most of you probably learned it when you were a little kid in sports, right? That if somebody was teaching you how to throw a football, for instance, they taught you that to throw correctly, to throw with the best form, to throw with the greatest potential, you needed to do what? Follow through. That if you stop midway, you're actually going to hinder the whole process, right? Or for some of you, it was a baseball bat. They taught you that when you're swinging, you need to follow through to the end so that you can have the best swing. Or maybe for you, it was golf. You have a golf club, and I could use some assistance on my golf swing, to be honest with you. But I know, because I worked at a pro shop for a summer, that I need to follow through with my swing in order to have the best potential for where it goes. I know that what these things say is that to do things right, many things require follow through, right? Mm-hmm. You know this if you've ever been in management. And if you've ever been responsible over other people, you've been, where you delegate tasks to other people, you also understand that follow through is important, right? That if you tell one of your employees, hey, I need you to set this up this way by this day, it's really important for the sake of their job that they follow through, right? That you also know this if you've ever had a child or been around a teenager or something, that when somebody says they're going to do something, that they follow through is really important, right? For the sake of their behind. It's really important, right? But what all this shows us is that there are many things that to do right, it requires follow through. And this morning, in this passage, Matthew 18, the Bible is going to tell us something that it says requires follow through. And now it's a little odd because I've never associated these two things before, but what I really believe, and this will pop up on the screen, is that forgiveness requires follow through. Forgiveness requires follow through. And we're going to see that in this passage. So if you're confused right now and you're thinking, what are you talking about, Pastor Nick? We're going to explain it here in just a second. But in Matthew 18, if you want to open your Bibles or follow along on the screen, starting in verse 21, it says this: Then Peter came up and said to him, that is Jesus. Peter came up and said to Jesus, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Okay, so basically Peter is walking up to Jesus and he's asking a question that many of us have asked at some point in our lives. And that is, how many times do I forgive someone? How many of you have ever asked that question before? Yeah. Many of you must be married to someone better than me, because I can promise you my wife asks that question a lot, okay? How many times do I forgive someone, the same person, for the same thing, no matter how many times? The thing that my wife forgives me for a lot, we just experienced it this morning, is that I leave the toothpaste tube out on the bathroom counter very regularly. Anybody else? Anybody will be honest in church? That's you? Yeah, that's my thing that my wife forgives me for. And I can promise you, she's asked the question before, how many times do I forgive one person for doing the same thing over and over and over again? And that's what Peter comes and asks Jesus today. We all ask that question. He comes up and he says, Lord, how often should I forgive my brother who sins against me? See, and we've asked this question before because some of us have funny little things like that. Or maybe for you, it's how many times do I forgive the person who steals my parking spot at work, right? Or, this is going to get serious, how many times do I forgive somebody who takes my spot in church? Oh no, he didn't. Yeah, how many times do we forgive someone for taking our seat? I joke. But seriously. Or maybe you've had some times in your life where we ask the question, how many times do I forgive that person when they talk behind my back? How many times do I forgive that person when they say something horrible about me? How many times do I forgive that person who does something really, I'm talking really hurtful to me? Where's the limit to forgiveness? And that's what Peter is asking Jesus in this story. Saying, Jesus, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? And the story continues, and Peter says, as many as 7 times. Everybody say 7.
7.
Now you need to know right here that Peter is being the teacher's pet in this moment. Okay, so when he comes up and he says, Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone? Should I 7 times? You need to know that he is expecting to get a pat on the back, and Jesus is going to come up and say, oh, Peter, you are so great. Because what we need to know is that in this time, the normal times to forgive someone was 3. Okay? The rabbinical rule, meaning the rules that the Jewish leaders, the rabbis made, was that no one should ask for forgiveness more than 3 times. Okay, so in this culture, 3 was normal. 3 was expected. 3 was appropriate. 4, and now you're getting excessive. We forgive someone 3 times, but once you get to 4, that was the limit. And so when Peter says 7, he's basically doubling it and adding 1. He's trying to be extra good. He's trying to go over and above. He says, Jesus, everybody else will forgive 3 times, but should I forgive 7? And he's expecting Jesus to say, oh, Peter, you are my favorite. But Jesus doesn't give him the response that he expected. In verse 22, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 8 times. Wait a minute. I think I read that wrong. He said, I don't say to you 7 times, but 10 times. No. Oh, he said, I don't say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. And Peter would have been taken back. He would have said, what? But what does that mean, okay? Some of you are good at math and you're saying, that means 490 times, Pastor. And that's correct. 70 times 7 is 7 times. But But Jesus doesn't mean 490 when he says 70 times 7. When he says 70 times 7, he's not saying that you need to, every time somebody hurts you or offends you or talks bad about you or does something wrong to you or says something that even just mildly offends you, that you need to keep a list. And then at 490 times and all the way up, you forgive them. But at 491, boom, you get to just give them what they deserve. That at 491, he releases you to give them what they deserve. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. Because in this day and age, the rabbinical rule was 3, but numbers symbolized things back in this time. And the number 7 was the number of completion. So when Jesus is saying 70 times 7, he's really implying an infinite amount. You forgive them until it is completed. Jesus is saying right here, not 490 times, but he is saying that there is no limit to forgiveness. I know that's hard. Because I don't know about you, but I have some people that I wish there was a limit. I don't know about, I'm just being honest in church, everybody. Honestly, sometimes I find myself making a list and trying to, if it just reaches a certain point, then am I all right to give them what they deserve? But Jesus is saying clearly here that there's no limit, that as Christians, we are to forgive people, period. Not forgive people until, or forgive people if, forgive people, period. And if that wasn't convincing enough for you, the whole 7 number of completion, 70 times 7 thing, Jesus makes it really clear for us, and he expounds on his answer with this parable that we're going to read this morning. So in verse 23, Jesus starts this parable of the unforgiving servant. It says, "Therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants." Basically, Jesus is saying this whole kingdom of God thing, or kingdom of heaven, might be confusing to you. Maybe you've not heard that. What that means is that Jesus is saying that if you want to understand what God is like, the kingdom of heaven, and how he operates, if you want to understand what God is like, what he expects of us as his people, okay, that's what the kingdom of heaven means, is just how God operates. If you want to understand that, you can do that by thinking, by imagining a king. And now you just take a guess at who the king is in the story. Like maybe the king, okay? But if you want to understand what God's forgiveness is like, you can do that by thinking about it like a king, or the king who wants to settle accounts with his servants. And what that means, to settle accounts, is that the king borrowed some people money, and now it's the time where he's coming back to get what they owed him. He's coming back to get what was rightfully his, to be repaid for their debt. So then it continues and says in verse 24, "When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. Okay, now I don't know about you, but I don't have any talents in my wallet right now. Any of you ladies have a talent in your purse or something? Maybe some of you do, actually, when we hear the definition in a second. You might have a talent's worth of change in your purse, okay? I know that some of you carry a lot of that in. But here's what a talent means, okay? A talent was a weight of gold. It was actually the largest unit of currency in that time, and 1 talent of gold was about 75 pounds. How many of you would take 75 pounds of gold if I offered it to you right now? Hallelujah, praise Jesus, me too, me too. So, some of you might have 75 pounds of coins in your purse, okay? And then you would have a talent. But it was 75 pounds of gold. So how much is that worth? It's estimated that 1 talent, okay, everybody say 1 talent, was worth 20 years' wages for a laborer. 20 years' wages. So that means if you're making $8 an hour, this is just entry-level pay, $8 an hour minimum wage, you work 2,000 hours a year, you're making 16 grand a year. Multiply that times 20, and you get $320,000 as 1 talent. 320,000, 20 years' wages. But this man owed how many talents? 10 what? 10,000 talents. So this man is a laborer, a common servant, and he owns owes 10,000 talents. That is 200,000 years' wages. I don't know about you, but I hope I enter retirement before 200,000 years. I hope I enter into eternal retirement before 200,000 years. You know what I'm saying? But he owes 200,000 years' wages. That is, if you're making 16 grand a year, $3.2 billion. 3.2 billion is what this man owes. And so again, numbers, especially when you get in high numbers like this in old times, what Jesus is saying here is an infinite amount. Okay, because this man to owe 10,000 talents was absurd. There is no way that the king would actually borrow him 10,000 talents. Because it was 200,000 years of what he was worth. But the king did in this case. He gave him more than he ever deserved. And then he can't pay it back. He owes this huge debt. And he's overwhelmed. In verse 25, it says, "And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold, with his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made." See, the payment for this debt was everything. It was his life, the life of his wife, his kids. Everything had to be sold. Because even if everything he had was sold, it was still just going to be a fraction of the debt that needed to be paid. So the master says, what you owe is your life. And so the servant fell on his knees, imploring him. Other translations say begging him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." See, at this moment in the story, the servant is desperate. He's saying, just, I beg you, just give me more time. I beg you, just give me a chance. I'll pay back everything. This man is humbled. He is devastated. He is desperate. But what we know is that he says, "I'll pay back everything," but we know that he can't pay it all back. Even though he has good intentions, there's no way that he could ever pay back his debt. 200,000 years' wages. Despite his good intentions, he could never pay it all back. But verse 27 says, out of pity for him. Other translations, I think, do a better job, and they say, moved by compassion. It says the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. See, the servant's master had compassion on him. He forgave the debt and he set him free. The master didn't need to do this. He was owed 10,000 talents, a huge debt. That's a lot of money, 3.2 billion today. I don't care if you're Bill Gates, you're going to try to get that 3.2 million, okay? That's a significant amount, even to a king. But he was moved by compassion, and he forgave the debt, and he set him free. And so I think about this servant, right? After doing this, he was just forgiven $3.2 billion. He has to jump up and say, "Are you kidding? I can't believe it." He has to be overwhelmed with gratitude. He has to be overwhelmed with thanksgiving. He's got to go jumping out of those courts, telling everybody about the forgiveness of the king, right? He's got to. He was just forgiven more than he ever could have paid back. He has to leave here telling everybody about this king's forgiveness, being overwhelmed with gratitude, right? I mean, if it was you, I know you would be overwhelmed with gratitude. If it was me, I would be overwhelmed with gratitude, I hope. But he has to leave like that, right? Verse 29. But when the same servant went out, this is right away, for instance. It's not saying like after a time, right away. He went out and he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, "Pay what you owe." Plot twist. Okay, it deviates from what I expected. Okay, so he leaves, he's not overwhelmed with gratitude, and he just goes out and asks this man for money. So a denarii must have been way more than a talent. It had to have. Like a talent is worth 20 years' wages. Like it's only 100 denarii, so it has to be a lot, right? Like it has to be a ton. No. A denarii was worth 1 day's wages for a laborer. So that means that 100 denarii was 1/3 year's wage compared to 200,000 years' wages. This is an estimated $5,333 compared to $3.2 billion. So this man, after being forgiven all that, he goes out to this servant. He says, "Give me what you owe me." And the story ends in verse 29. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him. The servant who owed him 100 denarii fell down and pleaded with him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you." When he says that, he means it. He actually could pay back 1/3 of a year's wages. But the first servant refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. And the master summoned him and said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. You begged me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers. Other translations use a different word for jailers, and they say torturers, to give us a picture not to the earthly illustration but the spiritual meaning. And he says, and he handed him over to the jailers or torturers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. See, this is an intense story. It is a serious story. But it's because forgiveness is a really big deal to God. It's a really big deal to God. Forgiveness is one of the most direct and stern things Jesus teaches about when he ministered here on the earth. Forgiveness is one of the most intense things he taught about. There are so many times that he forgave people, and he forgave them of their sin, where he set people free, where he loved people who didn't deserve to be loved. But he said, once you are forgiven, forgiveness is expected. Mm-hmm. Really, I think how I summarize this whole story is that the follow-through of being forgiven is forgiving. The follow-through of being forgiven is forgiving. And we said at the beginning that some things require follow-through. The story just told us that forgiveness requires follow-through. So that means that when we are forgiven, to accomplish that action until it's completed, we must forgive other people. Mm-hmm. Period. That the follow-through, that to do an action with the greatest potential, to do an action correctly, to follow through, we must forgive other people. And that's what Jesus is telling us in that story. But I don't know about you, but forgiveness is kind of hard for me. Forgiveness is one of those things that it's way easier to just be told to forgive someone than to do, because honestly, sometimes I don't even know what forgiveness really means, what it is. Or sometimes I don't know how I do it. So as I go just a couple more minutes, I want to give you just a couple things. One is what forgiveness means, and two, how you can do this, okay? So what does forgiveness mean? There's two definitions if you look it up in the dictionary, and the first is to stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone for an offense, flaw, or mistake. And this is what we're told. See, we're told to forgive and what? Forget. Forgive and forget. That, hey, somebody hurts you, you just stop feeling angry towards. Just think about it really hard and just stop feeling that. That's what we're told. Just forgive and forget. But I don't know about you, but I'm a whole lot better at forgetting something my wife tells me to pick up from the grocery store on the way home than when somebody hurts me really deeply. Anybody else? Yeah. Like, I can forget some things, but when somebody really betrays my trust, that's a whole lot easier to forget. And see, I think we have so much problem with forgiveness because we think that this is the definition. This is right out of the dictionary. To stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone. But I don't believe that that is the accurate definition. I believe that the accurate definition is the second one. And it told us that just in this story in Matthew 18. The second definition, I believe, is the full one, which is to cancel a debt. It means that to forgive someone is to say, you owed me this, but I no longer hold that over you. That I no longer am going to expect anything from you. That I'm going to cancel that debt. It's really to give up what we feel owed of something. And see, I believe when we understand forgiveness that way, it changes things. Because we're canceling a debt when we forgive them. I believe that forgiveness is to cancel a debt. Then the byproduct, the effect of that, is to stop feeling angry or resentful over a period of time. Okay? Forgiveness isn't just stopping to be angry. That happens once we forgive them, once we cancel the debt, once we give up what they owed us. So a couple things about forgiveness. One, forgiveness is not a feeling. Don't wait until you feel like forgiving someone. You never will. Mm-hmm. Don't wait until you stop feeling hurt about it. You never will. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. Two, forgiveness is not forgetting. I cannot forget when somebody hurts me deeply. I can't. But forgiveness doesn't require that. Forgiveness is to cancel a debt. It's not a feeling. It's not forgetting. It is to cancel a debt. The next point is that forgiveness is instantaneous, and yet it is not finished until the end of your life. What I mean by that is that forgiveness is instantaneous, because in this room today, in just a couple minutes, I'm going to give you an opportunity to forgive someone, which you're going to cancel the debt. You're going to give up what you have felt owed by that person. And that's instantaneous. But it's not done until the end of your life. You could say it this way: forgiveness requires follow through till the end of your life. Because what I know is that when somebody hurts me and I forgive them in a moment like this, it can creep back sometime. And after a day or a week or a year or 10 years, all of a sudden I can start feeling just as hurt as I did before. Even after it got better a little bit, it can come back up. And forgiveness is instantaneous, but it is going to require you to continue to forgive, to cancel the debt every time it comes up. That's what it means to forgive. So how do we do this? Reba, you could come on up. How do we forgive? Number one, I think where we have to start is that we acknowledge how much we've been forgiven. We acknowledge how much we've been forgiven. Because when we do that first, it changes the rest of the process. Just imagine if that first servant, after being forgiven the 10,000 talents from the king, if he would have just stopped. As he walked into the room with the other servant who owed him 100 denarii, if he would have just stopped and compared how much he had been forgiven to what he felt like he was owed. If we acknowledge before God how much we've been forgiven, I believe it will allow us to forgive. Without that baseline, I don't think we can do it. Step 2 is assess accurately. Assess accurately. Because sometimes what we try to do is we just try to brush it and say, okay, God, I want to forgive that person. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think about how much they stole from me. I'm not going to think about how much they hurt me. I'm just going to put it away. I'm going to brush it under the rug. But how many of you know that dirt always comes back from under the rug, doesn't it? See, The second step is we need to assess accurately. What we need to do is we really need to evaluate, we need to calculate every bit of the debt that they owed to us. You need to really think about it. Because if you don't, you're going to think about it later, I promise you. You're going to total it up later. You need to assess accurately what they owe you. And the final step is to cancel all of that debt over and over and over and over and over again. That the next time it comes up, it's not done. Forgiveness is instantaneous, but it needs follow through the rest of your life. And when it comes back up, when the dirt comes back out under the rug, you say again, no, I am not owed anything from you. I set you free from what I feel like I should be owed. That's what it means to forgive. And those are just some simple steps. And what I want to clarify is that it's not easy, but it's possible when we acknowledge how much we've been forgiven, when we assess accurately, and then we continually choose to cancel the debt that we feel owed. What I want to say here is that the biggest thing that we usually feel owed when somebody hurts us is an apology. To cancel the debt is to forgive them of everything that we feel they owe us. Because what I know is that some people that you're going to forgive today aren't around anymore. You literally couldn't be paid back with that apology that you feel like you deserve. And I want you to know that you probably do. If you were hurt, you deserve an apology. But unforgiveness doesn't hurt them, it hurts us. You know the quote. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison yourself and waiting for the other person to die. I think of unforgiveness like a knife, that when we're hurt, it's like them stabbing the knife into our heart. And unforgiveness is to say, no, this knife cannot be taken out. I refuse to let this knife be taken out because I want everybody to know what they did to me. I want proof. I want the knife right here so that when anybody looks at me, they can see how I was hurt. More than anything, I want the knife to stay because I want them to be able to see how they hurt me. But the only person that knife hurts is you, is me. And forgiveness is to take out the knife, to cancel what we feel owed, and to give up the need for people to see how we were hurt. So church, would you bow your heads? I know right now some things are coming to mind of how you've been hurt.